Welcome everyone to Pocketables Weekly News Roundup number 7. This week we have to start with, a correction, and we're going to thank, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I'll apologize for that as well, Yusuf for calling me out for saying this. We're still on some revision of the Skylake architecture. And basically, he's correct. Tiger Lake on the Willow Cove architecture, that's the code name for the Willow Cove architecture, that's the code name for the actual CPU core itself, is actually a modified Sunny Cove core, which is itself derived from the very short-lived Palm Cove architecture that Intel first tried to launch 10 nanometer on. I believe there was a single shipping CPU that was nearly impossible to find outside of a single Lenovo IdeaPad that was available in that. And I said that Tiger Lake is primarily just a slightly modified Skylake architecture. That was an oversimplification, and there are architectural changes. And what I was really trying to drive at in that statement is that I don't anticipate people to see large day-to-day improvements on the new chips if they're already on the most recent CPUs. And what I mean by that, so my P50 is an excellent example. I am on a 6700 HQ Skylake CPU. So that's a 4-core, 8-thread processor. And I would see a huge change going from it to whenever the larger 35-watt or higher Skylake chip, whenever the larger Tiger Lake chips show up for workstation class notebooks. So whatever P5X variant shows up out of Lenovo this year, potentially next year if it shows up in January with a new Tiger Lake chip, will be a massive marked improvement. People who are already on relatively modern systems, if you've got a laptop in 2019 or early 2020 and you got a 9000 or 10000 series CPU, you're not going to see a huge change going to Tiger Lake, with the exception of the integrated graphics. So on a dedicated graphics system like a workstation, there's not a huge improvement. There are measurable improvements to very specific workloads. And to that, I'm going to have to say, if your workload is one that benefits from things like the new AI extensions, or the addition of AVX 512 being present in a mobile processor, go for it. Tiger Lake is great. If you're not that person, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't get a new notebook if you want one, but I wouldn't anticipate that you're going to see a huge change jumping to Tiger Lake. And that's what I was really trying to drive home there, and did so in probably the most awkward way I could have. So, Yusuf, I hope I'm getting your name right. If I'm not, upload a video so we can pronounce it properly, and we'll bring that out in next week's news article. Zoom this week picked up virtual backgrounds on Android, something I'm surprised it took this long to add in. Virtual backgrounds seem to be both a delight and frustration for users in meetings I've been in, so it's a feature that I'm glad to see rolling out. Some people just, want to hide what's behind them because it's busy and chaotic, although the AI on it doesn't always do the world's best job. I usually encourage the users to get some kind of solid color background, be it a green screen like I use in the studio here, just a white bed sheet, a wall that's painted one color, any matte surface generally works. The one thing to keep in mind, and I actually had to mention this in a training video I made the other day, your background and your clothes can't be the same color. Otherwise, you'll be invisible. We saw some issues with that actually in last week's news video. In last week's news video, where my shoulders, due to some of the colored fabric, were partially transparent relative to the green screen. And I actually just held up a basket here, and although you could see some reflections on it, it was generally invisible. And if I had played around with it for a few minutes, I would have been able to find an angle where I could just hold it and it wouldn't exist. So, Zoom gaining virtual background support, that's going to be a benefit to, well, a lot of home users and a lot of people who are doing school online now on things like tablets and phones. Always good to see new features that are useful added to products. Probably the OMG news item for the week, Microsoft purchased Zenimax. That includes id, Bethesda, and several other studios, meaning that Microsoft is now the publisher for Doom and Wolfenstein and Elder Scrolls and a whole host of other titles, a lot of which are a decent number are actually PlayStation exclusives. So this is going to be interesting. Microsoft is now a much larger game publisher than it was. Not that Microsoft's new to game publishing. They own Mojang and have been the publisher for, well, publisher and developer for Minecraft for some time now, since they purchased that. Microsoft has had their own game studios for decades at this point, publishing titles like the Age of Empire franchise. Going to prove interesting what Microsoft does with this. This is certainly going to be leverage over Sony when Microsoft has the option to simply take away their exclusive franchises. We may see things move to limited exclusive releases, or I shouldn't say limited, timed exclusive releases on the Xbox before it's available on the PlayStation. We may see this be used as a tool to encourage crossplay between the two consoles, where, Sony, you can't have the next Elder Scrolls game unless people are allowed to play Doom cross-console. So, a lot of that remains to be seen. Microsoft is still committed to the agreements that were made by the studios prior to the purchase. So we're not going to see anything yanked away from Sony, as far as I've seen so far. But it's certainly going to be a big question mark when new titles are released. More gaming news. Geforce Now, which we've mentioned before, it's probably my favorite out of all the game streaming services that are available right now, is available properly on Linux and Chrome now. No more user agent changing in order to get it to behave and think that you're on Windows. I believe the changes for this also coincide with the added support for Chrome OS. So Geforce Now can run on all of those school computers that kids have been issued. I don't know if this is timed specifically for that or if it just happens to be a coincidence, but it's certainly an interesting change. I look forward to Geforce Now continuing to become more widely available. Out of all of the game streaming services out there, I mentioned it's the one that I like the best, the reuse of your existing games. So if I own a game on Steam, if I own a game on the Epic Games Store, I can go to Geforce Now, say I own the thing, and then stream my game on their hardware. And I know some studios and developers have kind of clawed their games back, potentially due to exclusivity agreements with some of the other streamers, but realistically, that's the way I want it to work. I don't want to rebuy my game. I don't want to buy it as a Stadia exclusive. I already own it. I just want to play it on someone else's hardware sometimes. Because there's stuff that my P50 won't run or will struggle to run nearly as well as my desktop. And that's just the nature of laptops. Unless you buy the biggest, best gaming laptop, it's not going to generally perform as well as a desktop. So, all of that rambling aside, I'm glad to see Geforce now show up on more platforms, and I hope this is a sign that it is a healthy streaming service and will be around for time to come. I mentioned my P50, my laptop, a couple of times in this, so it makes an excellent segue into our next news item. Lenovo has announced that you will be able to pre-order a large section of their ThinkPad and ThinkStation lineup with Linux out of the box. And this is something that we've seen companies dabble with on and off over the past few years. Dell is probably best known for it with their developer edition systems that shipped with Ubuntu. Lenovo appears to be choosing to ship Ubuntu as well, which is honestly a bit odd for them. Going back, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, going back to 2008, you could purchase ThinkPads and they were certified to run things like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which made sense in corporate environments that would buy a ton of ThinkPads and then run Red Hat Enterprise Linux on them to deal with their large Linux systems. And that also translated into a couple of other things, like Fedora would run on them fairly well. Ubuntu seems like a bit of a departure. Lenovo's generally been kind of cozy to the large enterprise customers, just like IBM used to be, and I think some of that extended from the previous IBM ownership of the ThinkPad line. So seeing Ubuntu certified, and I'll actually post a list. There's a certified Linux list, even though the systems haven't been available with Linux out of the factory. There was guaranteed support for versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and SUSE and Ubuntu available from Lenovo previous to this. So, that said, these new systems will be shipping with shiny new Ubuntu 20 with, I think, 2 or 3 exceptions that'll still be shipping version 18 LTS. And having used both of them relatively recently, that's a good place to be. I hope that this offers a cost advantage to the Linux systems as opposed to attacks of any sort. I'm sure that there is some cost for Ubuntu. They may have reached a contract with Canonical to provide additional support for these, which has a price to it. But hopefully we're not still paying for the Windows license that we're not getting on these systems. Some more gaming news. No Man's Sky, a title that is certainly polarizing. People either love it or hate it based on some of the drama that happened when it launched. Got a huge update this week. It's called Origins. I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I believe it's downloading right now. It is a massive increase in the procedurally generated content as well as entirely new system types. So, No Man's Sky had a very rough launch and has continued to receive free updates on the order of things that exceed what would traditionally be sold to players as DLC for other games. So whatever ill will people are still harboring towards Hello Games, I think they've tried to make amends and make up for it. They've effectively, I want to say there's 5 or 6 major updates for No Man's Sky that have completely transformed the game into something that not only meets what they promised in the first place, but exceeds it in several different ways. I'm looking forward to it. I always go back when there's new content available in No Man's Sky. Each update feels like I got a new game. So that's really all I can say there. We may have some footage of some of the new things if we can upload them. I will say, and this is probably the only bad thing I have to say about No Man's Sky, it was supposed to be in our video about that gaming system we built. And I'll link that video in the description and a card as well. The No Man's Sky video record in OBS did not come out properly. And I don't know if I need to blame OBS or No Man's Sky for that, but it's the only game that I didn't get proper footage out of. It played perfectly fine on the 1650 low profile that I put in that system. It actually did better than I anticipated. I expected to see like a long generation time on the 3770 compared to what I normally see on my dual socket Xeon desktop. But it ran fine, it generated everything fine and ran well. I just didn't get any footage to share with you guys. So if it was the fault of OBS, hopefully we'll have some new footage of it running if we want to review Origins. If it was an issue with No Man's Sky, I may have to get a little bit more creative if I actually want to record live gameplay footage. An entertainment item this week, the mouse has invaded the house. Disney Plus is now available on smart displays. I'm going to be honest with this one, I don't really get it. At no point did I think that I wanted to watch Disney Plus on a 7-inch screen. Maybe I'm just not the right demographic for this, but to me, having it available on my phone makes sense. I'm going to take that with me. And maybe I do want to watch an episode of The Mandalorian on a train or while I'm waiting for something. But if I'm home, and I assume many of you are in the same boat, I have several devices that are a better option, both ergonomically, based on their positioning, and just visually, based on their size. Some of these smart displays, they're coming with 7-inch screens, 9-inch screens. I think some of the largest might be 10s, and they're not usually put in a place where you would want to sit and watch an episode of a show. So I have a smart display on my nightstand. I've got the Lenovo smart clock. And I don't think that's one of the ones that it's coming to. And I've seen other people have smart displays in their kitchen on the kitchen counter for showing things like recipes. But I've never seen anyone put a smart display in a position where you would normally put a TV. So that means that your laptop, if you have a laptop, or your tablet, would both provide a better experience since you can sit in a comfortable position and then watch Disney Plus, or your television is a better option. So I don't fully understand what's going on here. But they did it, and it's going to be available on at least the Google ecosystem starting this week. So maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, call me out, just like Yusuf did. Tell me in the comments, and we'll follow up on it. But I don't really anticipate people wanting to watch Disney Plus on a smart display. Just seems out of place. Our last item, a company that we've talked about a couple of times, Mikrotik, released a new switch this week. This is the CSS 610 8G 2S Plus IM, which is an absolute mouthful, but actually tells me everything I need to know about this device. It is a desktop switch with 8 gigabit ports and 2 10 gig uplinks running Switch OS, so it's not a full CRS device. That said, based on the device size, I'm okay with this just being a Switch OS device. 8 1 gig ports and 2 10 gig ports, unless you were building a router, isn't something you'd normally anticipate doing a whole ton as far as VLANs or higher end switching on. I can see this switch being deployed as a workgroup device with uplinks to a local NAS or storage server or a VM host, that type of thing, using the 10 gig ports. So, or a render system. Build a render farm using one of these, put 8 1 gig devices on it, and then hook your storage up to 10 gig. So it's a little switch. It looks like the MSRP is about $100. I'll throw a picture of it up. It's not the most attractive device ever, but if it's fanless, which I believe it is, it should be a perfectly competent device. It also offers PoE in as power, which is a fantastic little feature on some of those switches that I've used a couple of places. I think I mentioned when I looked at the RB260 that I take advantage of that under my TV. I've got a 5-port switch there that has PoE in on one of the ports, and then I don't have to worry about it since I've got PoE out on my core switch here at home. There's no additional wall plug needed. On that note, I would love to see Power over Ethernet show up in all sorts of new devices. And not necessarily just as an add-on. Like the Raspberry Pis, the PoE hat is fantastic. I would love to see someone ship them with just native PoE. If I want to turn Raspberry Pis into things like security cameras or door locks and stuff like that, just running it with an Ethernet cable solves the Wi-Fi issue and feeds it power. That is everything I have for this week. I want to take a second and thank our patrons. They help make content like this possible. If you want to help Pocketables continue to make content like this, please check our Patreon out. There'll be a link in the description below. I want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes. As always, there's a link to his channel in the description. I definitely encourage anyone to check that out if they like what they're hearing. With all that being said, if you had any questions about a story that we commented on, or if we didn't explain something fully and you'd like us to elaborate on it, let us know in the comments below. And if it's something quick and easy, we'll answer you there. If not, we may make a video focused on that. And you know what? As Yusuf did, if we got something wrong, let us know and we'll do our best to correct it.